Okay, on the second page of the graph practice, we're looking at aggregate demand and aggregate supply with a recessionary gap. So every time we have this gap, we're going to be operating at short-run equilibrium to the left of full employment. So anytime a FRQ asks you to draw this, you're going to set it up just like that. Okay, and then label it, of course, however they ask you to. Okay, so what we've learned before about aggregate demand is expansionary fiscal policy, so something green to make the economy go. And what our goal is to go from this short-run equilibrium and get to this long-run equilibrium. So if we have a lowering of taxes or a raising of government spending, that's going to give us more aggregate demand because those are our components of Sig X. Once we get back to long-run equilibrium, we'll be at a little bit higher price level and we'll be at higher GDP output. So anytime you see these, kind of tell the story at the end. So unemployment is going to end up decreasing, which is a good thing. GDP is going to be going up because workers are getting back to work. It's going to cause price levels to go up, and that's also the same thing as inflation. So that's where we're going to tell our story right there. So we have a recessionary gap. We'd use that fiscal policy. Now let's go to the other idea of long-run self-adjustment. So if there's a recessionary gap, there's unemployment, and no policy action is taken. The long-run adjustment is that with people not working, they're not going to be buying as much. And when people aren't buying as much, they don't have those wages, and due to those multiplier effects, the cost of business are going to have to go down. These businesses are going to have to do something. So they can lower their wage costs by either getting rid of some employees or hiring employees back at a lower wage price. And when they do that, that's going to allow short-run aggregate supply to increase to the right and get us back to full employment. So those long-run self-adjustments are going to lower the price levels, which is good for everyone, and it's going to increase GDP output, which is going to get us out of that recession. So unemployment is going to decrease, GDP is going to go up, price level is going to drop, and that's going to make inflation drop. So those long-run adjustments are going to be set up by our flexible wages because businesses and workers have to adjust. On the other side of it, if we have an inflationary gap, that means we have kind of a positive overproduction, and therefore we have high prices everywhere. And when those things need some help from the government with fiscal policy, it would be something red, contractionary, that would slow the economy down. So whenever we have a fiscal policy like that, so instead of making aggregate demand shift to the right, which I forgot my arrow, so I'd lose points, now we need aggregate demand to shift back to the left to this long run. So aggregate demand is going to shift back to the left where all three cross, and that's going to pull some of these prices down, which is the goal of that contractionary policy. And when that happens, unfortunately, it's going to lose some GDP. So unemployment is going to increase as GDP decreases. That's going to bring price levels down and bring down inflation. So that's our successful contractionary policy. And of course, there's another chance for no policy action to be taken. So the government has no interference, no taxes, no government spending changes, and now what's going to happen to the long run self-adjustment? So we have these higher prices, and eventually those higher prices in the short run are going to catch up to all of the workers and the businesses. Input costs, everything else is getting more expensive, and short run aggregate supply is going to have to decrease. So when that happens, it'll move back to long run equilibrium. It's going to cause some inflation because we are decreasing our production. That's going to drive those prices up and get us to settle in with long-run equilibrium. So our long-run self-adjustment is that short-run aggregate supply, businesses and workers are going to shift back to the left because they're going to ask for high prices. The input costs are going to go up because suppliers are going to be asking for more prices to cover inflation as they need to go out and buy things in the economy. So this is kind of like a ratchet effect where everything keeps ratcheting up to give us long-term inflation. But it will get us back to long-run equilibrium. So unfortunately, unemployment is going to increase, GDP is going to decrease, price levels are going to go up, and we're going to have some inflation, but we will be back to long-run equilibrium. So big picture wise, page 2 is really about setting up the economy with inflation and recession, fixing it with policy actions or no policy actions, what would happen with long run self-adjustment.